What is up, RPG nerds? This is your man, Here Lies Link from RPG Ranked, and if you enjoy Final Fantasy, or Final Fantasy 1 in particular, please like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell for more videos. Alright, I don't have to shout anyone out for gameplay this time, because I actually went and got my own gameplay, surprising. So let's rank all the spells in Final Fantasy 1. I have nothing else to say, let's get right into this. In last place, it's going to be the Fear spell. Why does this spell even exist? It's complete garbage. It hits all enemies and causes them to run away, which could be good if it worked. But first of all, it misses almost every time, and second of all, you can one-shot most enemies, and third of all, if you kill an enemy with the spell, you don't even get the rewards. So crappy instant death spell that doesn't even have a point of view using it? Dude, I'd rather get a game over than use this trashy spell, because at least I have some dignity. Alright, let's move on to focus. Why would you lower the enemy's evasion in this game? There's no point. Just attack them and kill them. If you really want to lower evasion, at least use a decent evasion lowering ability like Focara. It's a little bit better, it hits all the enemies. Still trash though. Next is going to be Dispel. It erases all beneficial buffs from the target. In some games this is fantastic, like if it in Octopath Traveler or something, or in some Final Fantasy games this can be really good, but no enemies really buff themselves in this game, and the ones that do are pretty easy to kill usually, so this ability is kind of stupid and really dumb for such a high level spell. So I don't know, kind of dumb. Alright. Theoretically, this next one, Blindna, is not a bad spell. It fulfills its role of curing the blind status ailment perfectly. However, I feel like the blind status ailment is so rare in this game that like the 5 eye drops that you get throughout the game, or probably more than that, will be more than enough. So, this next spell, Dark, casts blind on all enemies with a low success rate. But why should you use this when you could hit them with an elemental spell or physical attacks and beat them up? I'd rather use Dark though, because at least you'll avoid some damage, and it might actually work, and you might actually be able to get the rewards from the battle after you deal some damage? I don't know, this is dumb. Next is Slow. This is really good in like Final Fantasy IV 3D Remake, but here, nope. Another useless spell. There's a lot of these useless spells in FF1. Next, Confuse. The only time I'd ever use this is at the Peninsula of Power, and you're underleveled, and you're trying to beat up some hard enemies, and you can't beat them up yourself, so you have to confuse enemies. That was the only time I ever thought about using this ability. Next is going to be Thunder. Thunder is weird, because no enemies are weak to it, yet tons of enemies are weak to fire, and Blizzard, although it has a lot of enemies that resist it, it deals more damage because it's a higher level spell. This was really weird. I didn't even know this until I was looking at the bestiary and stuff. But yeah, Thunder has no enemies that are weak to it. And since so many enemies are weak to fire at the beginning of the game, and because Blizzard does more damage, I just thought this spell was inferior in every way and goes a bit lower on the list than those other two. Next is going to be Blind. It hits one enemy and has actually a decently high success rate. But it's still pretty bad, because I guess like Peninsula Power, like I can find a use for this, like blinding a tough enemy could be good at some point in the game, maybe. Still better than, at least it has a chance to hit, unlike Dark, but yeah, it only hits one enemy, so it's kind of trash. Next is Scourge. The spell can one-shot Tiamat, and that's a good use for it. But other than that, just use elemental spells, it's better. And, like, right after you get the spell, you get the Razor Blade, which casts Scourge for no MP. So, I mean, Scourge isn't that bad of a spell, but it's completely obsolete, except for, like, the 10 minutes that you don't have the Razor Blade. So, I guess, if you want to use Scourge for those, like, 10 minutes, maybe, but otherwise, just use the Razor Blade. Next is Death. It's a single target death spell with a higher chance success rate than Scourge, and it's harder to get the thing that casts it. So I guess it's a little higher on the list. Next is the Sleep spell, which is nice to put all the pirates at Provoca to sleep, because first of all it works on them pretty well, and because you don't have the tier 2 elemental spells that can hit everyone. So I mean, it's nice because you don't want to get murdered by those guys, but otherwise, I can't think of a single other time that I used the sleep spell. Next is Quake, because it's better than Scourge, because it's Earth Elemental. Less enemies resist the Earth, like the Earth ailment. But seriously, why? It's another instant death spell. I am done with instant death spells. Alright, let's move on. Fire. It's better than Thunder, because enemies are weak to it at the beginning of the game, but it's not reliable to know what enemies are really weak to it, so I just found myself using Blizzard more often because it does more damage. Next is Hold. Paralysis is one of the best status ailments to inflict on an enemy, so I found the spell to be okay. However, in the end, status ailments are still FF1 status ailments, so it's pretty average. Next is Stun. More reliable than Hold because it's guaranteed to work on enemies with 300 or less health, but still not that great. Next is Kill. It's like Stun. Less than 300 health, but it kills them instead of paralyzing them, which makes me wonder why Stun even exists, but it's still not too bad. Next is Break, because it has a higher chance of working than Death. For some reason it has doubled the success rate, even though it's I don't know. And it can kill Tiamat, and it's more useful in killing Tiamat than Scourge, but again, physical attacks are still going to be better. Next is going to be Blizzard, the best black magic spell until you get a level 2 spell. However, why would I use this? Alright, let's move on. Next is Invis. It allows you to invade attacks that enemies send your way, and it can be stacked to make you untouchable. However, it's completely outclassed by Invisira, so why would I use this? I don't know. But it's still better than all the crap that we've said so far. Next is Null Death, because it allows you to avoid instant death attacks to the party, which is pretty nice. So you're like, why is this so low? By the time you get the spell, you can easily revive people with full life, prevent death with Null All, or just equip ribbons. And also, there are very few enemies that actually instantly kill you, and the more you level up, the higher your resistance to status ailments are. So by the time you're actually like at a high level, to the point where enemies are actually using death on you, you don't really need this anymore. Next is Vox, because silence is a terrible status ailment to be afflicted with, and the spell lets you cure it. And Echo Grass is a bit more expensive than eye drops. However, barely any enemies silence you, so I mean, yeah, same idea as Blindna, but I feel like Vox is a little bit worse to be inflicted with, and it's a little bit more expensive to cure, so I was like, okay, maybe this can go higher on the list, whatever. Next is Silence, which has a high hit rate, and it hits all enemies. So this can be nice against Astos and the Dark Wizards. It makes both those fights a pushover. However, in most other circumstances other than those two enemies, just hit them. Just hit them. Next is going to be Warp, my favorite instant death spell in the game. It's Death Element. And what am I saying? It's an instant death spell. And it's death, yeah, it is Death Element, which makes it better than the Quake and Scourge spells. And it's better than Death because it hits all enemies. So it's the Death Element, which is less resisted than the Scourge and Quake elements. And because it, yeah, like I just said, it hits multiple enemies. Next is going to be Teleport. It's a weird spell to rank on the list because it allows you to go to the previous floor if you missed any chest. Or it gives you a chance to get out of a dungeon if the White Wizard is dead. However, the Exit spell is just better. Like, there are very few times I've felt like I needed to use Teleport, but I did use it a couple times and it kind of saved my butt, so I don't know. It's kind of nice. Next is going to be Protect. It boosts your defense, which is a lifesaver against Astos, Pisco Demons, Marsh Cave enemies. It becomes obsolete as soon as you get Protera, but it's still a good spell. Next is going to be the first healing spell in the game, Cure, which is good. It's very good for the beginning of the game. It costs just a little bit more than a potion, yet it offers so much more. An amazing spell overall. Next is Blink. It's like Invis, but can only be cast on the caster. However, it has double the effectiveness of Invis, so there are a few times I used this later in the game. A few times, because sometimes I just wanted to protect one of my allies, and this can be really good, but otherwise, Stop is the next spell. And it's a time elemental spell, which is a rare element to be resistant to. And it stops all enemies from taking actions. The great thing about this spell, yeah, so few enemies resist it. And if your enemies you're fighting have high HP and aren't resistant to the time element, which most enemies aren't, this spell can be pretty useful. So it makes it better than an instant death spell, because like this is just such a rare element to be resistant to. And yes, there are still much better black magic spells, but you know, I like this ability a bit more than the last few. So Exit is a godsend if you need to teleport out of a dungeon. And yeah, if you're revisiting the dungeon, but most dungeons have a teleporter at the end of the dungeon, and the ones that don't, you don't even have the exit spell at that point in the game. So yeah, it's not too great unless you're revisiting a dungeon, which I don't really see why you would. But there are a couple times where this was very nice and very convenient. Alright, next it's going to be Saber. In theory, this is a really good spell. Like, the effect is very good, but it can only target the caster, and which means only your black wizard will get the benefit of an attack buff. I think you can see the problem there. If you equip the mass immune or the ultimate weapon with your black wizard, they can make good use of this spell. However, this would be the best spell in the game if it could be casted on characters other than just yourself. So I mean, I still didn't want to put it near the bottom of the list, because like, in theory it could be the best spell in the game, but yeah, it's not that good. And you can use the item with anybody. I mean, you can use the spell with anybody using, what, the Giant's Gloves or something, so it's still very nice. Diaga is the next spell on this list. A very great spell at the beginning of the game that allows the white mage to decimate undead enemies at the Chaos Shrine. Unlike the other tier 1 elemental spells, this hits all enemies on the screen. Whereas the original elemental spells, you're like, okay, well, my physical attackers can beat them up. It's one target. Like, I don't need to be using some spell. However, this one, it hits all enemies on the screen, which is really good for clearing skeletons earlier in the game, any undead enemies, and it holds up for quite a bit longer than fire and blizzard and stuff. And it also gives the white mage an option for doing damage, whereas, I mean, yeah, the black mage has a little bit more stuff going on with it, so it gets outclassed pretty early, but it's very good for the time you do have it. Next is Stona. Of all the ailments in Final Fantasy, this one is one of the most common, petrification. It makes it super useful. And it's very good in the Cavern of the Earth, where cockatrice are petrifying you like all the time. And it's very good in ailment-heavy dungeons, but usually you'll get enough gold needles from enemy drops that you're not going to be using the spell that much anyway. So next is Heal, a key spell to have in Final Fantasy. It restores health of all party members. This is amazing during the Marsh Cave and a lot of dungeons that you have to pass through before you get the upgrade Healara. Very good spell. Next is going to be Diara. Like the heal spell, Diara is extremely useful in dungeons like the Marsh Cave or Western Keep. However, while Cure can stand in for heal, Diara is irreplaceable. This spell allows the white mage to join in on the action as well, and it's a great spell to have. Next is going to be Blizzara. The best spell for clearing out enemies on the overworld, because it does more damage than fire or thunder. However, during the point of the game where you have Blizzara, not many enemies are weak to ice magic, and more enemies are weak to like Fira. Yeah. However, biggest issue here, during this point of the game, it's like where you go to the ice cavern, a lot of enemies resist ice, and it's just, I didn't think it was as useful as Thundara or Fira. Thundara is reliable, nobody's going to really be resisting ice, so, I mean, if you don't know for sure that enemies are weak to fire, I would say Thundara is the best option, and then Fira is next, because there are quite a few enemies that are weak to fire still, so, yeah. I think it's a little better than Blizzara and Thundara, but overall, they're honestly all kind of the same. So next is going to be Cura, an amazing spell right when you get it. It's also useful in the end game, all the way up till the end game, because it's the most efficient MP-wise for healing out of battle. However, it tapers off significantly and becomes useless out of battle once you get like Healara, Healaga, all that stuff. But it's still good out of battle, so not too bad. Next is going to be Diaga. Yeah. This spell is great against undead enemies fought in the Cavern of Earth and other subsequent dungeons you visit. Diaga outclasses it during the endgame. Diaga is still a decent spell. I mean, you don't have it that long before you get Diaga, but It's still nice. It's still nice. Next is going to be Poisona. I would argue that this is the first spell on this list that is useful the entire game, all the way up to the final dungeon. This is because the poison status ailment is by far the most common status ailment, and it is so annoying, especially in the Marsh Cave. Definitely buy it. It's very cheap to cost and very useful to have, and it's better than going and buying a million antidotes, so it's nice. Next is Diaga, which is the best spell for killing undead enemies, and it's by far the best spell for killing it. And it's one of the strongest spells in the game in terms of raw damage. Yes, you're not going to be fighting undead enemies every battle or anything, but it's still a very good spell to have. So, yeah. Next going to be NulShock. Halves the thunder damage dealt to the party. I feel like thunder spells are the least common to be hit with, so I put it here. Next is NulFrost. Like I was saying, NulFrost, like ice spells aren't as common as fire spells, which is next, NulBlaze. Usually you're getting hit by fire, so yeah. Like, of the elements, fire is the most common, so I felt like NulBlaze was the best. And again, Thundaga. Yeah, whatever. Thundaga's nice. Not as good as Firaga because it's the best for dealing damage. There's a lot of people weak to fire. Blizzaga is the most damaging. And there weren't that many enemies resistant to Blizzard during the time you have these spells. And Flare outclasses them pretty fast. So honestly, Thundaga, Blizzaga, Firaga, same deal. Like I was saying earlier. Just Thundaga, then Blizzaga, then Firaga. Next is Flare. One of the most damaging spells in Final Fantasy. Blizzaga and Holy are the only spells that can really compare in terms of damage. Even if an enemy is weak to fire or thunder, Flare will still do more damage. Blizzaga will still do more damage than Flare as long as they're weak to Blizzard, but Flare is more reliable. Like, who knows? Like, how are you going to figure out? Like, it takes a while to figure out what they're weak to. Flare is the most reliable spell for dealing high amounts of damage, but it's not my favorite offensive spell. There's still one I like a little better. And yeah, Flare is going to be what I usually use, or Blizzaga if I know they're weak to ice. Alright, let's move on to Curaga. A really good healing spell to have for the mid portion of the game. Purchasable in Melmond. Healara is still going to be more useful, but it's still really good. Like, I still was using this quite a bit. Next is going to be Slowra, which is going to surprise everyone and their grandmas. But it's one of the best spells in the game. It is a non-elemental spell, which means that people can't really be resistant to it. As long as you have a decent intelligence stat, it's going to work on all the bosses. Slowra causes enemies to have less hits on their physical attacks. And unlike Slow, which can be resisted, Slowra can't. This means that if you cast Slowra on a really hard boss, they're going to hit you for so little damage. This is basically a spell that like highly debuffs the enemy attack. It's crazy. The next is Slowra, but like I was saying, it's non-elemental. Next is Sleepara. Like Slowra, it's non-elemental, but it causes enemies to be immobilized. This literally works on some of the hardest bosses in the entire game. And yes, it still doesn't have the highest hit rate, but the fact you can just paralyze the hardest bosses in the game is absolutely insane. Next is Life. It revives one of your party members without having to use Phoenix Downs. It gets outclassed by full life later in the game, but during the second act of the game, life is the spell. Next is Healara, an absolute necessity during the portion of the game where you visit Cavern of Earth, Mount Gold, Cavern of Ice, etc. Top 3 spell for the second act of the game, and due to that, it ranks in this position on the list. However, you know, early game, obviously, you don't use it, and it gets outclassed by in the late game, so yeah. Next is going to be Holy, which is technically can be the most damaging spell in Final Fantasy, and you're like, what? It's my favorite, because first of all, your white wizard can cast it. The black and red wizards have tons of great damaging spells, and the white wizard really only gets this one and like Diaga. So first of all, it lets your white wizard have some opportunities to deal a ton of damage. Alright, that's kind of dumb. You're like, oh right, well I don't need to be attacking with my healer. But the crazy thing is if you get the Sage's Staff and you equip it on your white wizard, Holy does double damage. This means you can deal like 1,000 damage with Holy. This is like the only way to deal over 1,000 damage without physically attacking. and that makes it the best damaging spell in Final Fantasy in my opinion, and one of the best damaging spells, one of the best spells in general in the whole game. Next is Protera, which allows you to essentially nullify all physical damage from enemies and bosses if you keep stacking it up. It's absolutely broken. Casting Protera even just like 3 times will make you tank like all physical attacks. It's one of the best in the game. Next is Invisira, which are both Protera and Invisira are equally good. Which spell to use is up to personal preference. I personally like Invisira better because Invisira increases evasion, and if you use it enough, you'll just not even get damaged. Whereas Protera, it's a bit more reliable because enemies aren't always going to miss, and it takes a while for that to get up there, so you're going to be in more of risk. But Invisira just has a better payoff. It's more risky, but high risk, high reward, you know. I like Invisira a little better. Because you know what, FF1 isn't that hard, so I might as well use Invisira. Alright, next is going to be Null. I wouldn't say, yeah. Protera and Invisira might be better than Null, but since Null, like there's 2 options for buffing defense, and here there's only 1 option for buffing elemental defense, I'm putting Null above them. This spell not only protects the party from fire, thunder, and ice, but also earth, status, time, poison, and death. Some argue that this spell is obsolete due to the ribbon, but I don't want to be equipping the ribbon because the ribbon only gives you 1 defense. I don't like that. So I'd rather just use Null on my party members. Overall, one of the best defensive spells, one of the 3 amazing ones, and one of the best spells in the game. Next is Full Life. Direct upgrade to Life, which is already one of the best spells in the game. For 40 MP, you can revive a party member with full HP. This is basically a necessity against the game's hardest super bosses, because if you just use Life or Phoenix Down, nope, that's not going to do it. Prepare to die. Like, it's stupid. Like, overall, this is an amazing spell. You really want to have Full Life. Next is Curaja, which is like Full Life, but they don't have to be dead to use it, right? Like, yeah. But, and preferably, I don't want my characters to die, so I think Curaja is a little better. It's basically the same. One revives you, one doesn't, but Curaja I used more because I didn't want my party members to die before I had to heal them, so yeah. Really good. There are still cases where this is useful even with Healara, because Healara might heal, what, like 400 health to your whole party. Curaja is going to heal full health, so if an enemy hit you with a like 900 damage physical attack, use Curaja. You'll thank me later. Next is going to be Haste, which is overpowered in boss fights. It basically just doubles your damage. Combine this with the Monk or the Warrior's physical attacks, and you have an overpowered boss killer. The fact that you can just double your attack power with a very cheap spell is insane. Next is going to be Healara. This spell is the best healing spell in the game. You can heal your entire party for a ton of health, and for just 38 MP, you can basically just survive every boss fight in the game, just spamming this ability. Sure, Curaja is going to be a bit more useful in certain cases, and if you don't buff yourself up with the Null and the Invisira and the Protera abilities, you might die, even using Healara. But if you buff your defense even a little bit, Healara will compensate for any damage done by anything. And of course, my favorite spell in the game is going to be Temper. It allows you to increase the attack power of the target, and unlike Haste, it can stack. This allows you to hit like a tank against boss fights, and is basically the reason boss fights are so easy in Final Fantasy 1. Honestly, bosses aren't even that easy in Final Fantasy 1 without Temper. It's available in Provoca, the second town in the game, and has a very, very low MP cost. Using the spell in tandem with the Haste spell allows you to kill a final boss, and any boss basically, in a single physical attack. This is absolutely absurd. Like, what the heck? A attack buffing spell that is stackable? What were they thinking here? It's absolutely broken. And yes, Haste doubles your damage really quick, and Temper is a bit slower. You can stack it to infinity and beyond, so it's so good. Thank you guys all for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to check out some other Final Fantasy videos on the channel. We got like a bunch of videos from the series. We got a couple Final Fantasy 1 videos. Yeah, if you enjoyed this video, check out some of those. Like, subscribe, get some merch in the description maybe. Check out RPGrank.com for some articles. And other than that, thank you guys all for watching. Peace out, RPG nerds. Have a fantastic day.